teach fertility awareness to your clients and master the skill of advanced chart interpretation. Learn to support your clients through their cycle irregularities and hormone imbalances with confidence. Our Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship is now accepting applications for our next class in January 2026. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/famlive to apply today. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAMMLIVE. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 592. Today, I'm sharing a brand new episode in the FAM research series. And what we are going to be covering today is this topic of, quote, misinformation on TikTok. A recent paper came out, and the title of the article is, "Do you know what birth control actually does to your body?" So it's assessing contraceptive information on TikTok. There has been a recent wave of studies like this one that I have taken an interest in, and I've shared on the podcast throughout the year. There's more and more researchers specifically looking at social media and the impact of social media on the information that people are deriving about their contraceptive choices and hormonal health choices. And there seems to be this general kind of fear of the establishment losing the plot, right? So the way that I look at it is that for many, many years, the medical professionals basically had the final say. They were the gatekeepers of all the information. What they said largely went unchallenged, and there was no real social discourse about their practices. So you would go to your doctor's office, your doctor would tell you what you need to do, and you would either do it or not, but you didn't really have an open social forum to discuss this critically and to kind of throw out those ideas. And so with the landscape changing so much, with the advent of social media, with now the ability for women to go online and talk about what's happening to them, share videos, and regardless of your medical credentials, you can go out there and say whatever you want. Now, the medical professionals are starting to kind of see, oh, wait, this is having an impact on the conversations that I'm having in my office. Now all these women are coming in with these different ideas that we did not provide for them, and they're having to contend with that. And so that's one of the reasons why I've been paying attention to this space, and I've been sharing this information and these papers, because I think it's important to see how they're responding to it, and also what the implications are, whether you are a medical professional, whether you're a women's health professional, whether you're just trying to live your best life and not have period pain and hormonal issues. I think it's really important to look at how these kind of bigger bodies are dealing with the advent of social media. So we're going to dive into this paper today. And so basically the way that they did it is they started by kind of acknowledging just what TikTok is and what it's become. So they share some interesting stats. I mean, according to what they are saying here, TikTok has over 2 billion users. So they're kind of stating some of this background information that since it officially launched in 2017, it has now amassed an incredible just amount of users, and also that it offers certain kind of specific differences. I mean, each social media platform is a little bit different. TikTok obviously specializes in short form video. And one of the things that they said, so a quote from the paper is, quote, "TikTok is well known for its recommendation algorithm, which utilizes personal interaction data to suggest videos and keep users engaged with the platform." So like a lot of different social media tools nowadays, if you watch, it's not even, what's interesting is it's kind of sinister. I don't know if you've noticed this, but if you like certain things and officially kind of like you have your idea of what you officially like, it's not necessarily going to show you that. Some of these algorithms seem to be designed to give you more of what you actually look at. So you might think like, I like this kind of stuff, but whatever you actually look at and when they're clocking your every move and they can see the videos that you spend the most time on, those are the videos that they actually serve up more, right? So So I think that that is an interesting point, but basically it's saying that it just gives you more of what you are looking at because of course the app is designed to keep you on the app. So the algorithm wants your attention because of course many of these platforms are monetized. And so you are the product and whoever is able to kind of keep the most attention of the users is then, that's the whole point. So that's something to be aware of. But the researchers bring this up because they're saying that this whole thing, this whole system of feeding you more of what you're interested in can create essentially a bubble for you. And so there are problematic aspects of this. So for example, I've heard of situations where perhaps a woman is on there looking at accounts that are talking about anorexia, a highly problematic and potentially fatal situation. And so if you're on there and that's the kind of content it keeps serving up and you're in this bubble, then you can end up with a very skewed view of the world. So while it can be, I suppose, useful in some sense because you're seeing things that you're interested in, especially for, I think, younger people who have not necessarily had a lot of life experience, it could be serving up a very narrow view of the world. And this is something that outside of this study and this conversation, this is certainly something that has come up in our programs because when you're working with clients, if your client is following a very specific, limited dietary pattern, for example, if they're on social media, likely all of the people that they follow or most of the information that they're watching is from that specific narrow viewpoint. And so there are obviously problems with this way that the world is. And I'm certainly old enough to have grown up without social media at all. And social media didn't even exist until I graduated from university. So I can certainly see some of the potential issues with this. Okay, but that's how they start the paper, by providing some background information and kind of showing why they're looking at it. And so basically what they're saying is these platforms are huge. They also go into how many views, these videos are getting and how many likes and shares they're getting. So basically they're acknowledging these platforms are garnering huge audiences. And so potentially their influence could be greater than the medical establishment. Now, I don't know if that's necessarily true because we still have a very well-established medical situation here. But what I think the tide is essentially turning a little bit. And so these papers are intended to kind of explore what they can do about it, right? So that's a little bit about the background. And one of my critiques of these types of papers is how they're designed. So basically, well, maybe not how they're designed, but I think my specific issue is with how they define misinformation. So in this paper, they don't directly define what they term as misinformation or misleading information. But as has been the case in many of these papers that are evaluating the validity of social media content, they generally define misinformation as information that goes against the consensus. And so they're looking at what is the medical establishment's viewpoint on this topic? Are these people online posting information that matches with that kind of established viewpoint? And if not, you're often automatically put into this category of misinformation, regardless of whether or not the information is actually true. So this term of misinformation or misleading typically is not necessarily related to the actual factual scientific validity of that statement, but more so how closely it matches to their consensus of what they say. So this paper in particular is looking at contraceptives. So they're looking at contraceptive information and they use specific hashtags. They created a list of specific hashtags and looked for videos that had the highest views. And so they examined 100 videos between a defined period of time based on their kind of process of identifying hashtags that would be relevant to the topics that they were looking at to determine then the validity, according to them, of these videos and where it's coming from, who's creating them, and all of that. So it is a really interesting review of what is happening essentially on social media. So I'll give you a couple of direct quotes from the study just to get a feel for some of the things that they're highlighting. So one of the direct quotes from the study is, quote, "Misinformation is especially prevalent in videos concerning hormonal contraception when uploaded by self-proclaimed experts or non-health professionals whose knowledge is often based on personal experiences or beliefs. In conjunction with personal opinion videos that discuss negative experiences with the contraceptive pill, such content may shape viewers' beliefs and choices regarding contraception and foster distrust in conventional healthcare, potentially increasing the risk of unwanted pregnancies. Basically, the videos that they were looking at are videos that are critical of hormonal contraception for the most part, and also videos that are presenting other alternatives. So they're looking at the pill, how people are talking about the pill, and basically any video where a woman is kind of sharing her personal experience of it. They're concerned that it's going to present it in a negative light. And then they also specifically are looking at any accounts that are talking about fertility awareness-based methods or other, quote, natural contraceptive methods. And they don't look at these situations favorably. So I'll give you another direct quote just to give you a sense of how they're looking at things. So, quote, another example of how misinformation on TikTok may influence reproductive choices through shaping contraceptive beliefs can be seen through the millions of TikTok videos that promote the effectiveness of, quote, natural birth control methods such as fertility awareness-based methods, FABMs, that aim to identify the fertile window by tracking biomarkers for ovulation, including basal body temperature and cervical mucus. The researchers go on to say, quote, while these methods can be effective and are a valid choice for many people using contraception, the success of FABMs in pregnancy prevention depends on several additional factors, including, the method used. So ... So this actually sounds pretty open. I mean, when I was first reading through the paper, I was like, actually, that sounds pretty reasonable, right? Like, while they're valid, and so they're kind of acknowledging the validity. But if you go on further, that's not really how they're looking at it. They don't really consider fertility awareness-based methods to be effective. And the reason that I say that is because later on in the paper, they make a different statement that is not as forgiving or not as balanced. Popping into today's episode to let you know about our newest resource for women's health professionals, the Practitioner's Guide to Optimizing Egg Quality. This comprehensive guide breaks down the 5 key steps to improving egg quality, along with the top 5 evidence-based supplements to support egg development, mitochondrial health, and implantation potential. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/egg quality to grab your complimentary copy today. That's fertilityfriday.com/egg quality. Now let's go ahead and jump back into today's episode. The researchers go on to say that TikTok influencers who endorse these fertility trackers, so they're kind of conflating fertility awareness-based methods with fertility trackers, which I think is interesting. They didn't really skip a beat there. So TikTok influencers who endorse these fertility trackers often fail to disclose the lack of evidence supporting their effectiveness when used incorrectly. Furthermore, they also fail to mention that FABMs for pregnancy prevention are generally ineffective as standalone methods, thereby misleading young viewers and potentially contributing to unwanted pregnancies. So I find this interesting because this was in one paragraph. So this statement here. So they're saying like it could be an effective choice for people and whatever, like that seems to be like they're saying like it could be an effective choice. But then they're simultaneously also saying that they are ineffective as a standalone method. So they're fully contradicting themselves here, which is interesting. But I guess the bottom line is that inherently, anybody who is presenting non-hormonal birth control methods, particularly fertility awareness-based methods, that inherently is considered to be misleading information or misinformation because of their stance that the methods are ineffective. So that, I think, is a useful way to kind of frame how they're looking at these methods. And I think the bigger elephant in the room is that you can never provide fully accurate and complete health information in a video that is like 3 to 5 minutes long. So I do think that they do touch on this. So we'll get into that a little bit more as we go through what they found and their conclusions about it. But ultimately, there's an inherent issue with social media. I mean, that's something that I face. We've created a 9-month practitioner program where we meet our practitioners every week. We have online recorded training modules, as well as classes. I have written multiple books. We have significant recommended and required reading for our practitioners. There is zero chance that if you go to my Instagram account, even though I've been sharing information about fertility awareness for decades, there is zero chance that you will get a full education about how to use the specific method correctly from that post, video, any of that, because it's a whole thing. You have to learn how to do it. There's books that you should read. There's trainings you should watch. There's activities that you need to do. You actually have to practice and you have to chart your information. You have to learn how to overcome some of the challenges when your charts don't match up or make sense. You have to know how to handle it if your cervical mucus isn't optimal and what could be causing that and why the temperature might be unreliable in this particular cycle, or how to take your temperature correctly and interpret it correctly so that it can become more reliable. And you can have it like, there's a whole thing that has to happen. So there's zero chance that any social media post is ever going to provide complete information about any topic. It's just not possible. So I do think that that's worth looking at as well, because we have to be taking this for what it is, right? Social media gives us snippets of information. It can spark our interest in certain topics, and it can certainly provide some level of education, but it's really the start of someone's journey. You would think that if somebody discovers something about fertility awareness on TikTok, if they think that they're going to look at a couple TikTok videos and then start using the method, I mean, that's obviously not going to be effective, but I don't know that that is what the intention is for that information. And there also has to be some consumer education so that when people are consuming this information, they don't actually think that it's complete, and they would recognize that they would have to do a significant amount of personal research and kind of recon to figure out what's going on. So I want to say that as well. And I think the researchers do touch on that, but it is interesting to read these papers because they're kind of highly critical of people putting out information, and they're kind of, even in their study design, they have this specific tool that they use to assess the validity of the social media content. And I mean, the tool is pretty robust. Like, they're looking at all of these different standards in terms of whether they presented a full definition of what they're talking about and whether they stated the intention of it and all this. None of that is happening in a 1 minute to 2 minute TikTok video. So even the tool that they use to assess the validity of the social media responses wasn't designed to assess short form social media content. It was designed to assess written medical content. So I feel like there is something to be said for that. So anyway, so we'll keep going through this study. The researchers searched TikTok for the most popular contraception hashtags. They picked the top 100 videos. They looked at who made each video. They looked at what type of content it was, like if it was advice, if it was a personal story, if it was an opinion. They identified whether it showed distrust or trust in doctors or hormonal birth control. They judged the quality of the information using that tool that I was talking about that was not designed to assess social media content. And then they compared this information. So again, what's interesting is that they are in this paper singling out as a criterion whether or not you are promoting hormonal birth control, right? So that's interesting in of itself. And they are looking at how the information is presented. This was interesting though. So they did have a fairly narrow definition of what qualifies as a medical health professional. So doctors, nurses, midwives, pharmacists. That's it. So anybody who is not a doctor, midwife, pharmacist, or nurse, they are not a medical professional, and they would be either lumped into what they term general uploaders, so just random lay people, or they also kind of made a specific distinction for people who call themselves hormone health coaches or health educators. So they kind of have these three categories of people. And so what they found was that the majority of the information uploaded on TikTok, zero surprise here, is from general uploaders. And so that would be almost 60% of the videos. 15%, or about 30% of if you add them together, about 30% of the videos were put out by individuals who considered or who called themselves health coaches or health educators. And then they said that medical professionals contributed 10% of the videos. And then they identified certain companies, maybe companies that are selling products that uploaded only 2% of the videos. So I rounded up. So if anyone's doing math, you'll notice that you would have to add 2, but that was the breakdown. So I think that's interesting. The videos that they looked at specifically, because they were looking at some of the top videos based on these hashtags, received a total of 4.85 billion views. So the median of that was about 300,000 views, and the views ranged from 5,000 views to almost 90 billion views. So that was kind of the range of the videos. And the shortest video, 4 seconds. The longest video, 215 seconds. So just a few minutes long. So, I mean, again, if we're looking at TikTok and if we're having a legit conversation about this, we're looking at real short form videos. TikTok is not a place that I think anybody could really think, I'm going to go to TikTok and get like a PhD. Like I'm really going to go there and get a solid understanding and comprehension of anything. So I do want to say that because we have to look at what it is. So it is making an impact, but it lends itself to very short snippets of information that provide just a little kind of taste of something, but you'll never get the full story from a 3-4 minute video. Like it's not a thing. Okay. So a couple other stats that might be useful. So these videos that they reviewed had a total of 14.6 million likes. And on average, they were shared about 244 times, favorited 1,500 times. And then the average person that they were looking at having these views, on average, about 76,000 followers. So obviously, some of the influencers would have millions of followers, and then some would have like a few thousand. So that is interesting as well. I think they're trying to kind of establish how much influence do these people have. And they're looking at what is the information being presented, how is it being presented. So a few kind of tenets of what they found. Of course, when they're looking at this type of content, they're acknowledging that there is a general distrust towards hormonal contraception. And they did have an interesting quote. So one thing I want to say is, as I kind of shift into how they interpreted the results, I was actually pleasantly surprised. I was expecting to come in all guns blazing. So while I'm fully critical of the things that I've said so far, they were looking at it. So I feel like they came on really strong, like, oh, this information, misinformation and whatever. But then when they actually were discussing what they found, what I think is they are really having to contend with this problem. So you can either just get mad at these millions of people out there who are clearly looking for alternative forms of information and clearly wanting to have this social discourse about their experiences of hormonal contraception, of their desire to potentially look towards more natural methods and their desire to balance their hormones. And regardless of whether the medical system thinks that it's valid for women to want to adopt natural methods or whether they think it's valid for us to want to balance our hormones and feel better, these are like terms now that have social media companies are identifying and downgrading reach of. Things like balance your hormones, things like fix your periods, things like support natural fertility. These are things that they're actually clamping down on. But the reality is that obviously there's a huge population of women who are dissatisfied with the standard of care. And so that's why these videos are getting billions of views, right? So like I said, I was pleasantly surprised to actually see them contend with the reality of the situation, which is that obviously women are starting to want more. So a couple of things that I want to point out here. They did say here that 53% of the creators of this content did, according to them, explicitly reject hormonal birth control. So they were saying like they were putting out messages that were, well, they say explicitly rejected, but of course I don't know exactly how they qualified that, but they're saying that they were rejecting it. They're not promoting it. And another thing that I thought was interesting that they said the most frequently discussed contraceptive methods were fertility awareness and cycle tracking, 38%, and the pill, 35%, reflecting the dichotomy between, quote, natural birth control methods and hormonal contraception. So they're seeing this. And I think that is interesting as well. So they're saying like 38% of these videos were talking about fertility awareness-based methods. Now, this is especially fascinating to me because when I started learning about fertility awareness, it was definitely not a thing and absolutely not. There was not like millions of people talking about it. So it's growing. The interest is growing. right? And so it's like the medical establishment they're at a crossroads here. It's either we're going to keep saying it's ineffective and it's stupid for anyone to use it and blah, 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 or they have to actually learn about it and look at the evidence-based methods, fertility awareness-based methods. There's a lot of evidence behind them. So it's either you're going to dismiss it out of hand and just pretend like it's not happening and put your hands in your ears and just la, 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 or you're going to look at the situation here. You're going to start to look at the research on different fertility awareness-based methods and become familiar with the most and least effective in terms of what the research has to say, the differences as to why some are more effective than others, and actually start to understand it, right? So that's something I'll also get to in a little while here. Did you know that you can listen to Real Food for Fertility for free with your 30-day trial of Audible? Head over to fertilityfriday.com/realfood to listen now. That's fertilityfriday.com/realfood. So there was an interesting quote. So when they get into the discussion, like I said, I feel like this is where we actually get to see a more reasonable take on this. That's, like I said, I was pleasantly surprised. So one of the quotes from their discussion was, quote, "A general distrust towards hormonal contraception is, according to this one researcher, fueled by health professionals' persistent focus on its safety and high effectiveness in preventing pregnancies rather than on the potential side effects." They go on to say, "A provider-driven decision-making process in contraceptive counseling, which fails to include information that reflects social norms and concerns, has proven to result in decreased satisfaction with the final chosen contraceptive method." So the researchers, after kind of blasting all of these non-medical professionals, social influencers that are putting out just information, they're also having to acknowledge why it's happening. And so they're seeing it, right? It's like all of these women are going online and they're saying like, I had this side effect. I had this side effect. This was bad. I don't like contraceptives. And I mean, right? Like they're not being quiet about it. They're also, a lot of content creators are trying to get more views. So they're also going to purposely say things in an inflammatory way so that they can achieve their goals, right? But the point is that you have this whole population of women that are saying like, I went to my doctor, I told them all the side effects, they didn't believe me. And so they wanted to put me on a different one and a different one and a different one. They weren't listening to me. So now I don't trust them anymore. And now I'm going outside of the medical system to get my information. That's basically what's happening. And like I said, I was pleasantly surprised to actually see them acknowledge this, because what I think as women, what we're used to is us making a complaint and then them just ignoring it or them just pretending like it's not happening and us being gaslighted. But now they're kind of having to address it. There's obviously a lot of women that are unhappy, or there wouldn't be, 400 billion views of these 100 videos that were mostly not favoring hormonal contraception and also specifically favoring natural methods. Not every single video, obviously there was a mix, but there's a pretty significant percentage of videos that were specifically saying like, we want natural methods, right? So that's interesting. So another quote from the paper, they said, "When shared decision-making expectations are unmet, patients may perceive this as a subtle form of coercion, favoring hormonal contraception and thus a violation of their rights. They might feel pressured, dismissed, and even deceived by medical professionals. Consequently, TikTok may serve as an important platform which gives voice to women's lived experiences of distrust in health professional advice and the treatments they recommend." Wow, right? That was a quote from the study. I feel like that was the most clear acknowledgement of what's happening. They actually put it into words. Maybe they were surprised at how many videos there were, how many views that these videos were getting, and what these women were actually saying, and the fact that so many people were liking them and sharing them. Maybe they were like, whoa, we're still classifying this as misinformation, but what is going on here? That to me, this is why I was surprised by this section of the paper, because this to me shows that they actually do know what the problem is, right? This is like to say that patients may perceive this kind of like I'm not going to, like when they said shared decision-making expectations. So the patient is coming in saying, I don't just want you to shove your prescription down my throat. Like, I don't want you to just tell me what I need to do. I'm coming here because I have this problem and I would like to have a conversation about how I can solve the problem. But then when I say, like, I'm thinking about these non-hormonal methods, when I say I want to balance my hormones and you tell me that it's a fairy tale and that's stop looking on Google, then it is no longer a shared decision-making process. It now becomes a top-down parent-child, you tell me that I need to do this thing and you're not listening. So it's not a two-way conversation. And so that's what they said. They said patients may perceive this as a subtle form of coercion. And that's exactly what it is. They just put it into words. It's refreshing when they actually put it into words. I feel like that's more powerful than what I would have said. Patients may perceive this as a subtle form of coercion, favoring hormonal contraception, and thus a violation of their rights. Their right to informed decision-making, their right to just getting information and being able to decide what is best for them. They may feel pressured, dismissed, and even deceived by medical professionals. Yes, that's what we've been saying for decades. And now you've put it in the paper. Yay. So where do we go from here, right? There was something else I want to say along these lines, which I also found to be very powerful. So I'm also going to read that. For example, so this is a quote. So quote, for example, multiple TikTok users express their disapproval of standard contraceptive counseling practices instead of advocating for advice from hormone health coaches or health educators over medical professionals. A simple Google search of these terms yields numerous blogs and websites offering advice not typically addressed in a healthcare setting. Recent research suggests that this increasing reliance on social media for health information from individuals, whether qualified or not, is reshaping the patient-provider relationship into one where providers act merely as gatekeepers for obtaining prescriptions. Again, wow. So this is the most powerful acknowledgement of what's really happening that I have read. A lot of the research that I have read is just more gaslighting. It's just more, these people are going online and sharing their unqualified views and blah, 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 but not actually listening to what they say or trying to figure out why they're saying it, right? But here we have in black and white in this research paper, when they're going through and discussing the results, they're acknowledging that women are going to healthcare professionals. They're not being heard. They're not being listened to. Their concerns are not being met. And so now they've turned against the medical system in a way because they're since they're not getting the answers that they are looking for, they're going to other sources. They're going to other sources of support to actually get their problems met. And they said that a simple Google search of these terms, so the terms that they're looking for, yields numerous blogs and websites offering advice not typically addressed in a healthcare setting. So I can guarantee you that in our practitioner program, when we are teaching the nitty-gritty details about advanced menstrual charting and chart interpretation, that is not a thing that you're going to get in your conventional medical setting because it's not taught in medical school. So therefore, you can't have that there. It's just not a thing. And so I feel like this is kind of like the beginning of maybe a reckoning. They're saying that if we don't do something about this, then we're going to lose a big part of our patient population. They're not going to come to us for support. They're basically going to come to us just as a pill pusher. They're going to come to us only when they need prescription medication, and that's it. They're not going to come to us for their health information. So what I do find interesting about this paper is the discussion I found was very meaningful. I did feel like they really did address, at least to the degree that they can. I was impressed, and that's hard. But I was impressed by the honest, actual, they're seeing what's happening. They're not completely ignoring what the patients are saying. And they're trying to actually provide a meaningful assessment of what the implications are for the medical profession. And ultimately, their recommendations and their conclusions are that So I'll go through just a brief summary of their conclusions. So obviously they're concluding that TikTok is a major source of contraceptive information for young people. Now, of course, from their view, they're saying that the platform is dominated by, quote, negative personal narratives, misinformation, right? So they're saying that it's whatever it is, but that's from their perspective. They're saying healthcare providers are underrepresented on these platforms. And they feel that the healthcare provider's information is more accurate based on their tool that they use that was not designed to evaluate social media content and is geared specifically that if anything goes against the conventional standard, that it's automatically misinformation, misleading, right? So they're saying the healthcare providers are providing more accurate information based on their standards, and they're saying that they're underrepresented. But they're also saying that there's a pressing need for health professionals and educators to engage on there, providing balanced evidence-based information. But when you look at what they're saying, the conclusion, some of the things that they're saying are that healthcare providers actually need to understand the challenges that their patients are facing. They actually have to start listening to their patients, because if your patients are searching for certain types of information that you don't provide, you're not equipped to provide, and their needs are not being met, they're going to go elsewhere. So I think that's a big part of what they came to. So specifically what they say about this is, first, healthcare providers must acknowledge that young adults may obtain information about contraceptive methods from social media platforms like TikTok, and it's essential for providers to incorporate this awareness into their contraceptive counseling, ensuring that any biases regarding hormonal contraceptives are addressed. So from their perspective, as usual, they're wanting to go in there and like correct, like, oh, you heard on TikTok that birth control has all these side effects. Like, it's interesting because I'll link one of the previous episodes that I recorded about these misconceptions about birth control that they were kind of outlining. But when they went point by point, all of the so-called misconceptions and misinformation were just literal side effects that are reported. And it was kind of like, what's the misinformation here? Like, you're addressing all these side effects, but all of them are real, and we have a lot of research on them. So like I said, I was impressed by the quality of the discussion, but at the end of the day, they're still towing the party line that we need to correct these misunderstandings that these women have. I think, though, for this audience and for our FAM practitioners, or for any women's health practitioner that is concerned about women's health, women's hormone health, menstrual cycle health, increasing awareness of fertility awareness-based methods, for us in this field who are looking to support our clients in a more meaningful way, I feel like there are conclusions that we can take from what they found. So the conclusions that we can take from this information are, one, that women really are dissatisfied, obviously, with the care overwhelmingly. There is a huge portion of women out there who are becoming aware of the limitations of hormonal contraception. I've always done my best to be as neutral as I can when I talk about hormonal contraception. I talk about the side effects in detail based on what the research has to say, and acknowledge that for many women, this is a valid and an important choice. I would never want the contraceptives to be taken away completely, because I think that they are important. I mean, I took contraceptives for a short period of time as well when I was a teenager, so I can't really say anything about that. And the way I've always approached it is that if we give women information about the side effects in an honest fashion, yeah, it has the potential to change how they would interact with it. But I know everybody isn't trying to be objective. So I know there's a lot of people out there that are just straight, like, I would never take it and it's horrible and no one should ever take it. And yeah, so I think one of the takeaways as women's health professionals, or as part of this community, the Fertility Friday community here, is that we have to take the information online for what it is. Everybody can talk. Anybody can say anything on there. And if you are a women's health professional who's working with clients, then it is useful to just, if this comes up and if your clients have concerns, there is something to be said for having some level of understanding about what the platform is, taking it for what it is, and doing our best to find valid sources of information. There is some risk in getting primarily a lot of information from various social media platforms. At the end of the day, anybody can go on there and say anything, regardless of what experience they have. And people can lie. People can lie about their expertise and their certification. So people can say whatever they want. So I think as women's health professionals, if you are using social media, I would say that it's time to up your game. Let's try to keep it as evidence-based as we can. That's something that I've tried to do. Of course, I include some fun in there. I have a sense of humor, so I'll include some funny reels and memes and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, I've always tried to put out evidence-based information. I'll cite the sources. I always put those citations in there if anyone wants to verify the information. I have always my whole career in this field has really revolved around, don't just take my word for it. We'll provide the receipts and you can take a deeper look into that if you want to. And so I think it is useful to look for individuals who do stuff like that. Look for people who aren't just saying stuff, who actually are providing that reference so that you can go and look deeper into that topic. So there is a huge buyer beware component to this and to interacting with social media, but I don't think that it means we throw it all out of hand. Also, as I touched on in the beginning, TikTok, hello, 2-minute videos, 30-second videos, we can't be expecting more than that. So if you have younger women in your life, if you work with a youth population, if you have teenagers, it's basically our responsibility to educate them. I did not grow up with these platforms, and they do have the ability potentially to really skew your young child and young adults' views on certain things because it's providing such a narrow view. And if the algorithm just keeps showing them whatever they're looking at, then they just may end up this very narrow view on a certain topic without actually looking at the full information. So that is definitely one of the takeaways that I had from reading this paper and thinking about, well, what can we do about it? And so if you are involved in putting content out there, then do your best to put out high quality content. Now, they're not going to call your content high quality simply, even if it's evidence-based, even if you're citing the research, if it goes against the conventional narrative. But at the end of the day, if you are taking that responsibility seriously of providing information for your clients, if you're a women's health professional, or even just personally, I think it is useful to think about that and to really strive to provide information at the highest quality level possible. The other thing I would have to say for women's health professionals who might be putting content out for clients and things like that is that even though they seem to try to be sort of impartial about fertility awareness-based methods, these researchers at least were not having a favorable perspective about fertility awareness-based methods at all. So it was definitely just out of hand. They dismiss it as a legitimate method. It's just out of hand. It's not effective, right? They're just putting out all that information. So anybody who's working within that fertility awareness field, it is up to you to provide the evidence-based information about fertility awareness-based methods. This is a small field. And I've watched it grow since I've been in it, but it's still a small field. And obviously within the medical profession, it is not their favorite thing. It is this inconvenient problem that they're having to contend with as more and more women come into their offices saying that they want non-hormonal methods and asking about it. So there's a huge, huge bias against fertility awareness-based methods. There's a huge misconception that they are ineffective in all circumstances. And that is because it is not taught in medical school. So doctors are not reading peer-reviewed research papers that have been published about fertility awareness-based methods. They may or may not be able to actually list even 3 or 4 of the established fertility awareness-based methods that have been extensively studied. They may or may not, likely not, be able to actually talk about why certain methods have a higher efficacy versus others and what would be the best practices if you had a patient who wanted to use this method to gear her to the more effective strategies for using this method successfully, right? So it's just a lack of information, a lack of training, a lack of knowledge. And so as women's health professionals, it is up to us to be able to provide evidence-based, accurate information and to move away from our personal biases. If you have a personal bias against birth control, but you have a client who wants to use it for a period of time or has her own reasons for it, again, sometimes it might be hard to do that, but I think that our goal shouldn't be to present opinions to people and try to force them to do what we would do. I think the more professional thing to do is to actually provide research and information and to understand and respect the choices that your clients might make, even if the choices are different to what you would make. And the same thing applies to fertility awareness-based methods. Providing the actual facts and information, I think, is where we start with this so that women can know. The problem is that we have not been provided with full and accurate information about the things that we need. We're going to doctors and they're just telling us to use these prescriptions, but they're not necessarily providing us with a list of the side effects. We're taking medications and we don't even know the side effects. And so then when women then Google to find out, well, why am I having these panic attacks? And why do I have low libido? Why all of a sudden do I have painful sex? Why, right? All of the things that happen, even some of the strange side effects, like why am I all of a sudden having gallbladder? Like there's so many different issues that are associated with pill use, but exactly like what zero women who leave their doctor's office with a prescription for the pill are provided with like a full side effect profile. So from my perspective, the biggest issue is the lack of information. And so if we're out there, like I said, if you're a women's health professional, if you're posting out information on social media channels, I think it's up to us to provide the accurate evidence-based information to the best of our ability. And obviously it's not going to be complete because it can't be complete. It can't be complete in a social post, but we can at least do something to elevate this conversation. So those are my thoughts on today's paper. I hope that you enjoyed it. It was, like I said, this topic has been really interesting to me because I do see this growing amount of research in this area. So they really are having to contend with the fact that women are going outside of the medical system and the medical system is losing the narrative here. They have had this narrative. They've been in their little bubble for so long. And now women are coming out saying, look, I didn't have a good experience with this. My doctor didn't help me when I asked about this. So it's kind of like, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to continue providing subpar advice and support for women? Or are you going to actually look at what you're teaching in medical school and try to adapt to what women actually need? And we'll see. I guess we'll see. So if you can think of somebody who would benefit from hearing today's episode, if there's someone who comes to mind, your first bestie that comes to mind that's like, oh man, I need to share this with her. The share link for today's episode is fertilityfriday.com/592. I just want to thank everybody who has shared the podcast, who shared my books, The Fit Vital Sign, Real Food for Fertility, who has just spread the word about this podcast. This podcast and this community has largely grown based on word of mouth. It's really been a passion project for many, many years, just to increase awareness about fertility awareness-based methods and just the importance of having information about how our body works, how our cycles work, and how we can be empowered with that information to improve our health. I mean, that's at the end of the day, we want to feel good. We don't want to feel badly. And if we're not getting the support, like they talked about in the paper from our medical professionals, where else are we going to find this information? They're leaving it up to us to figure it out because they're not helping, right? So for those of you who've shared the podcast, I really appreciate that. And, if you have been listening to the podcast for a while, one of the best ways that you can thank me is to leave a review and a rating on Apple Podcasts, because of course, that is how people determine if they're going to listen to something. When we're looking for something, we're always looking to see what other people are saying about it. So I would really appreciate for anybody who is leaving a review or rating on Apple Podcasts. It is amazing. So thank you for everyone who's done that. So with that said, I'm going to stop here. I hope you have a wonderful weekend whenever you're tuning into the show. And of course, as always, until next time, be well and happy charting. If you're loving the podcast and you're ready to apply fertility awareness strategies in your women's health practice, then I know you'll love our Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship. It's a 9-month immersive experience that will completely transform the way you work with clients, allowing you to not only teach fertility awareness, but to use the menstrual cycle as a vital sign and diagnostic tool in your women's health practice. Our next class starts in January 2026, so there's still time to reserve your spot. There's no other program like this offered anywhere. Transform your practice in 9 months. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/famlive to apply now. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAMMLIVE.